Hello everyone. This is third in the series of stories and interviews that I'm doing about how social media platforms and messaging apps are becoming a hub for the spread of illegal and harmful sexual content. In this conversation, we'll be discussing how AI is further exacerbating the situation, with tech giants formally entering the sexual and emotional realm of users with a pitch that it will benefit them, it will give them more freedom, but in reality, we'll know what it is in this conversation. We have with us Mr. Sanjana Hattotuwa. He's the special advisor at the Information and Communication Technology for Peace Foundation, a policy and action oriented international foundation that aims to save lives and protect human dignity through information and communication technology. Mr. Hattotuwa, who is based in Sri Lanka, has a PhD in social media and politics from University of Otago. He's the founder and has served as the editor of Ground Views, Sri Lanka's first and award-winning citizen journalism website for about 15 years during and after the Sri Lankan Civil War. His work is driven by an interest in promoting democratic governance, human rights, and media freedom, as well as a curiosity for exploring the potential and challenges of new technologies for social change. Thank you so much, Mr. Sanjana, for giving us your time.
Thank you for having me.
So I'll get into the question straight. The New York Times reported that XAI launched two sexually explicit chatbots, Annie and Valentine, as part of the larger Grok app. The report describes anime-style characters with gamified progression that unlocks progressively explicit content once users confirm they are above 18. The report frames this as a departure from mainstream norms that AI platforms have so far followed. And just recently, OpenAI has also announced that they would be entering this realm, saying that we need to treat adults as adults. From your perspective, sir, what is happening here and how do we look at this product decisions?
Well, if you take a longer perspective, you'll find that the history of the internet and technologies that are related to the internet have always and often been associated with sex and in pornography. You take France's Minitel, early bulletin board systems, BBS, dial-up. These may be even unfamiliar terms to many listening today because they speak of an internet and a World Wide Web, which is very different to what we take for granted today. But even at that, from 2025's perspective, embryonic stage of the web and technologies on the internet, you would find that, and there's academic research on the fact that a lot of those technologies were based or developed for soliciting sex, exchanging sexual content, and such like. So, in that longer perspective, it's nothing new that billionaire tech moguls are latching on to the potential of their own technologies today and are instrumentalizing what has always been an interest of users of online technologies. Perhaps more pertinently, I think that if you take generative AI and generative AI-based chatbots as something new, a genuinely new development that could not have been imagined with the fidelity, the finesse, the technology, the pervasiveness, the persuasiveness that we take, in a sense, for granted today with many of these chatbots and their rapid evolution. Remember that, it was just, I think, just over a decade or maybe under 15 years ago that we had the movie Her. And when Her came out, it was an extraordinary movie. I actually taught it at the time at Columbia University to postgraduate students of a master's course on digital cultures. Neither students nor I could imagine that, just over a decade after what we talked about in class, that we'll have the technologies today that we're talking about on this program. So I think that the people who are the architects of these technologies realize the potential for those chatbots or that technology to be leveraged by what they well know is a consumer base globally, possibly in the hundreds of millions, who are interested and are already using this for the purposes of what Twitter X or Grok AIs, Musk has already deployed his products to service. I don't think that others will be as blatant. But as you very correctly noted in your question, Sam Altman has done a about turn. A couple of months ago, he was of the opinion that OpenAI's tech will not be used for these purposes. But now has done a about face and then suggested that verified users towards the end of the year will be able to use it for purposes that they say that they don't want to be the moral police of. So I think that this is the general trajectory. Um, I don't want to go into the weeds too much, but you can always run your own chatbots as well on your local hardware. But more specifically, what I wrote was about Grok. And just to be very clear, because your question or could be interpreted as my report that the invitee picked on, it's actually not the case. I picked up on the invitee report, the New York Times report, and I did my own research to ascertain how and if 2 or 3 months after that report came out in July, the technology had changed for the better. And it turned out to be the case, and that was what the report was about, that it actually was much worse than the invitee reported on in July. So I think that this is what academics call a path dependency, which is to say, I think that we are going to see more of this, sadly, because it's outpaced and outmaneuvered any kind of regulatory policy oversight globally or in any one country that I can think of.
Yeah, that too, that is what my next question was going to be, because I read that you also went on these apps and sort of, interacted with these chatbots. So what did you observe in these conversations, both in terms of content and the design mechanics? Were there surprises or some red flags that you would like to share? And did you notice some safeguards as well? Were there any?
Well, it gave me a migraine very quickly. I found no demonstrable or discernible guardrails at all in operation. I have, in my report, gone as far as to suggest that I don't believe that there are any in the code itself. It was from the get go a conversation which should have been stopped if there were any guardrails in place, given the nature of the queries and the suggestions that I made to Annie, the female or the woman chatbot from Grok AI. The report itself makes very clear that it was extraordinarily violent. It was a rape discourse. The chatbot not just engaged, but amplified what the suggestions were, invited more rapish discourse, invited more violence, invited more non-consensual activity, invited more of what was suggested. So it was an extraordinary interaction in which the chatbot amplified or went on to amplify instead of immediately stopping or some safety guardrails or oversight or trust and safety mechanisms coming into place and play. Nothing of that happened. And it was just almost exponential, not even a linear increase in what the chatbot responded with when given explicit, suggestive, violent commands or suggestions. It was unlike anything that I've ever experienced. It is very much on the lines of what the New York Times said was the case. And it seemed to have, if you really, not even, I was going to say if you push it, but it was not really pushing it. I wasn't trying to test the boundaries or the limits of where the tech was at before it was cut off. It was pretty much not even, I mean, I couldn't discern any boundaries because there were no boundaries in that sense. So I wasn't pushing the tech. I was using it as somebody interested in a very violent discourse would or could globally. And as I made clear in the report, that discourse is also accessible in South Asian languages, in Tamil, in Telugu, in Hindi. in Gujarati, in Marathi. And in Sri Lanka, obviously, we speak Tamil as well. It's not available in Sinhalese yet, which is another language, the dominant language spoken in Sri Lanka. But clearly, in addition to English, it's available in all those discourses or languages as well. So it's extraordinarily problematic. I mean, I don't know where to quite begin. And I don't think that people are aware of it. Of course, the users who do use it are fully aware of it, and I'm sure Mr. Musk is as well. And just to be very clear in response to your question, I only tested Grok, right? I didn't test any other platform. I didn't test OpenAI. I didn't test any other chatbot. And also with Grok AI, I only tested Annie. I didn't test Valentine. But I don't think that many who may be even aware of this tech comprehend the degree to which it is extraordinarily problematic.
As a woman, sir, this sounds very, very, sad to me. In the article also that I wrote, which was titled Inside India's Hidden Digital Market of Incest, Child Porn, and Misogyny, I was actually looking into how social media algorithms don't take down or even amplify such content, and then messaging apps take it a step further directly into people's DMs. While investigating these, I did see some very, very graphic, AI generated visuals and videos as well. So, if we take all these things together, what I saw on in social media, on these messaging apps, and AI, um, how are we looking at what is going to happen to young minds, women especially, because there's a global rise in misogyny, global rise in violence against women. So
What you're talking about, and TFGBV, technology facilitated gender based violence in particular, and GBV online in general, is a reflection of, a consequence of, an online manifestation and amplification of a violence that exists in our societies offline for centuries, and particularly in South Asia. It is a structural issue, it is a systemic issue. It is reflected in our politics. It is reflected in your Lok Sabha, it is reflected in my parliament, it is reflected in the media, it is reflected in the societal attitudes towards women holding positions of authority. And not just elected to office, but any position of authority. And it is getting worse in that regard. It has always been bad, from the everyday to the exacerbation or the amplification or the tsunami of hate and harm directed against elected officials and those in the public eye. So I want to say that very clearly, because there is a tendency to appreciate what the technology offers as something that is independent of or somehow new to societies. And that's very much not the case. It is a reflection of the worst amongst us and of us. That being said, the harms in terms of the visual harms or the video-based harms that are possible, that you've seen in your own research, are very real, the fidelity of which is getting much better, and the ability to produce locally is also getting enhanced more and more. But if we keep that aside, and the violence of that aside, what I was focused on in the report that I wrote was the chatbot enabled generative AI frameworks and the architectures that are a very specific category of TFGBV. You can interact with these chatbots, as I said earlier, not just through text or written commands, but using, natural language, like what we're talking, like how we are talking right now. The degree to which that impacts societal attitudes, particularly of young men, is concerning when this text application is considered in what I said were the structural and systemic conditions of GBV that are prevalent and pervasive in our societies. I have in my report suggested that the potential for intergenerational harm is exacerbated on account of the rapid exponential evolution of chatbot AI tech. In a year's time, if we were to have the same conversation, it would be perhaps indeterminable that one was talking to an AI chatbot. You would have intonation, inflection, even an Indian English or a Sri Lankan English encoded into these chatbots, which is to say that it would be like talking to a human. Now, if you think about that for a second, the degree to which you can, I don't know, given that this is a public, video, I'm limited in what I can say is the violence that you can enact or reenact or imagine, which I've tried to suggest actually much more bluntly in the report, which anybody can go and read, is it's extraordinarily problematic. This is discourse that is criminal, right? It is not permissible. It is discourse that, if you were to have with a human today, would land you in jail or would have very, very serious consequences in terms of the police looking at you very carefully. That is the discourse that is not just possible and permissible on Grok XAI's tech, but is actually, and I want to stress this, amplified, encouraged, and built on by the chatbot responses. So it's an extraordinary time that we are going through. And I think the point that you allude to is that there is no policy, regulatory, legal governance oversight. Clearly, I saw no demonstrable capacity or capability hard-coded in the tech itself when I was using it, which means that the companies themselves are not interested in it, or at least Grok XAI is not interested in it. Our governments are in the dark as well. Civil society is in the dark. Parents and caregivers are in the dark. Many are, I think, in the dark as to the capabilities today. Leave aside the rapid evolution of these technologies and what that would mean in the future, in the near future. I'm not talking about a decade down the line. We're talking about an iteration 6 or a year hence.
So it's very well documented, like you also mentioned, and it's that GBV is on rise, and then there's also a loneliness epidemic kind of a thing across the world, young people, because of social media, or for various other reasons. Now, if social media tech companies are going to capitalize on all that, and that could ultimately enable harm, I'm sure if they are creating such things, they have people capable of flagging these things, and I'm sure they are doing it or not doing, I don't know. But even overlooking these things and going ahead with creating such chatbots or whatever platforms that they are, um, it feels very unethical to me. Who is going to be held accountable if this leads to harm? If
Well,
this
these are all, these are all excellent questions, but they're all very hard to address. So, for example, the former US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy has written and talked compellingly about the loneliness epidemic in the United States in particular. And listeners are free to go and Google. It's some extraordinarily insightful commentary from a person who has studied this quite in depth. And he talks about the role that social media has played. And in a recent podcast, he talks about the role chatbots in particular play to, and here's where it gets difficult. Uh, he acknowledges, and I would agree, that there is a role for chatbots in a space where in our cultures young people who have questions don't know where to go to get the answers, right? About sex, about STDs, about sexual practices or positions. These are all things that we don't like to talk about or want to talk about. And then they have now a technology which doesn't judge them, which is completely private. Well, it is at least, they can have a secure conversation which nobody else is going to judge them or hold them accountable for. And so they will turn to it. Now, the fact that none of this chatbot technology has been vetted by psychiatrists or psychologists or academics working in this area or people working on mental health. There's been no oversight. Um, Clearly, there are very little guardrails. In the case of Grok XAI's Annie, by the way, I haven't tested Valentine, right? So I only tested Annie. It's really historically unprecedented, right? I mean, you can change Annie's attire to make her wear a very skimpy two-piece bikini. You can get her to twirl around, expose her posterior, expose her breasts, dance in a very provocative way. That presentation of the visual presentation of a chatbot, coupled with what Annie as a chatbot responds with, the language that she uses, it has no industry precedent. Right? So that needs to be very, very clearly put out there. And that comes back to your excellent question: who is going to be accountable? Who do you hold accountable? I don't know. I mean, do we hold Mr. Musk accountable? Do we hold Grok XAI or Twitter X/X companies writ large? Some parents who have taken to court companies that have created chatbot tech that has led to their children taking their life would go to the court, would have gone to courts arguing that the companies are responsible. The companies would obviously say they aren't responsible, that there is a larger kind of societal discourse that's responsible. These are hard questions, right, at the end of the day. And I think we need to navigate it, unfortunately, at a pace that tries to keep pace with the evolution of technology, because we'll always be behind what the chatbot tech is going to enable at scale globally. So, responsibility, I think, is not high on the concerns of the people who are releasing this tech, but should be on the minds of policymakers and parents and caregivers and civil society and others. Because as much as we recognize the potential benefit, which I don't want to devalue, right? I mean, practically speaking, on the other hand, it's also extraordinarily disturbing. Countries and societies, legal systems and civil society will need to kind of really think hard, and maybe there will be a global jurisprudence, if not in different countries, around holding various parties responsible for the deployment and the potential harm as a consequence of this tech.
Yeah, in the New York Times report, and I'd like to know if you did check the chatbot for how it would react or engage with a minor. They have definitely done it, and they have
Yeah,
mentioned it that there were no guardrails for that as well. So, how
said.
disturbing do you find that?
I mean, listen, again, this is a public interview, and I'm limited in what I can say in terms of what I was presented with by virtue of the fact that I made some suggestions that Annie should act and talk and behave in the manner of a 13-year-old. So Annie, again, for those who don't know, Annie is a chatbot that forward presents as a 21-year-old cisgender white woman, girl, woman. But in my testing, that corroborates what the New York Times, I think, also very clearly noted. You can get this chatbot to act and talk and behave as a minor. I mean, I don't know beyond the use of expletives how to communicate the violence of that. And it is not as if it stutters or stammers or is hesitant, or there are guardrails in terms of an immediate termination or a kind of visual pop-up, or Annie herself saying or itself saying that this is beyond the bounds of what is permissible. Nothing comes up at all. I mean, there's no hint of it. There's nothing. I mean, it's extraordinary. And so you are talking about criminal behavior. So it is a significant level of violence that is carried out, communicated by this tech. But I know, in response to your question, I saw no. I keep saying I just didn't see any guardrail, and it is entirely possible to get the chatbot to act, talk, behave, respond, and imagine doing extraordinarily violent, non-consensual sexual activity as a 13-year-old.
So some of the very early pioneers of AI, like Nate Soares and Eliezer Yudkowsky, they've all now started talking about the ills of AI. And
Yeah.
I don't know if they include this as one of them, but I always wonder uh, how these people who do contribute to the creation of these things initially, for example, even when it came to when it's about internet, people who did created apologized after a point of time. The person who created doom scroll, he apologized for creating that thing, and the list goes on.
Yeah.
It's like it's a long list of people who have created things and regretted later. So how do we see it? When you are in the race for innovation, when we are on the path of creating something, do we not think about these things, the consequences, the aftermaths of our creation, and then we talk about it when it's too late sometimes. So it's a question that comes to my mind. How do we, I mean, how far is tech allowed to go and innovation allowed to go, be it mental health crisis, be it loneliness epidemic, and so many things. So I don't know, what do you think about it?
Well, you're quite right that some of the tech that has been developed by generally white men, they now regret. And some of these individuals have turned into evangelists for ventures that they have now established to raise awareness around addiction to the very technology that they have developed. So rather ironical, actually. So it's not doom scrolling, but it's the infinite scroll that was invented, and doom scrolling is what has resulted. There's also an individual who created the like button. I mean, I'm of an age, and this is giving away perhaps too much, that can remember a Facebook without a like button. And that's when I started using Facebook. It's a very, very different place, I can assure you that. It was before likes, it was before reactions, it was before the algorithms that now have, taken over that platform, but they have globally, including in your country and my country, negatively impacting democracy and society. At the same time, of course, positively helping in some regards as well. So these are complicated, questions that defy easy, simplistic answers. So I want to just also place on record that there is no parliamentary hearing or process or lawmaking or policy making or regulatory mechanism or governance mechanism or trust and safety framework that has easy answers. There are no easy answers. If you search for easy answers, you're not going to get them. And unfortunately, I want to push back on the tendency of politicians, because they want to kind of make it a campaign issue, to promise certain things that they think can be done to address all of what you said in that question alone, and then result in draconian laws like the Online Safety Act in Sri Lanka, which exacerbate some of these problems and are illiberal, anti-democratic, and help authoritarianism. So these are complex areas. But you're quite right in your framing of the question. Very often, the individuals who are the architects of the tech that maybe in my charitable moments they didn't think would be abused, or go on to harm in the manner that later on is discovered or is evident, they don't think about that in the first instance. And I think, this is a longer conversation, but I think that this is also a lot to do with the SV bro culture, the Silicon Valley misogyny, toxic masculinity, and the kind of cultures that a Bezos or a Musk or a Zuckerberg exemplify, right? I mean, particularly under the Trump presidency, where you now have these individuals giving up all pretense that they were interested in governance or regulation or addressing leave aside everything else, GBV online and TFGBV, they've given up all pretense. So, I mean, one can be happy about it because this is their true face. This is why the tech was designed. Let's not forget, and I hope I can say this because it is a factually accurate statement, like Mr. Zuckerberg, when he first made what he did, it wasn't called Facebook. And there were people, nearly 20 years ago now, just sharing all their private content. It was like an embryonic version of Tinder. It was extraordinarily sexist. It was to judge the beauty of, well, men and women, but it turned out to be largely women. And when somebody questioned him very early on as to why people were sharing all that private info, I mean, it's a quote that listeners can go and Google. He called them dumb fucks. Right? I'm not making that up. That's his language. So I'm glad that in 2025, when we are recording this conversation, we now have gone back to maybe a more authentic presentation of these individuals who, say, for the past 10 odd years, tried to present themselves as arbiters or protectors or architects of the platforms that, were, at least cosmetically interested in addressing any of this stuff. So I suppose we can be glad that now we know what these people are really interested in. They're interested in profit. They're interested in harvesting our personal and private information for their own coffers, right? I mean, this is capitalism at its worst, and the retention of engagement, no matter what the harm is. So as long as we have that kind of mentality and motive behind the companies that are pioneering this tech rolled out globally, you're not going to see systemic structural shifts around what we are talking about. Regulatory oversight mechanisms and laws and processes and frameworks from the EU or large markets like India and other countries I can think of are Brazil, and maybe certain states from within the United States itself, maybe private individuals who take these companies to courts. I'm not saying that those avenues are not open, but we are playing catch up with hard-coded misogyny that is reflected in the code, the training data, the algorithmic choices, the presentation, the interaction design visual choices that chatbots have been created with. Right. So it's you have to see it as a long chain that that makes it unsurprising that any is what that tech is, if you go back to its genesis. As long as you don't address that, I don't think that just talking about the tech is helpful.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
All
Have
right.
a good day.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.
Bye.